It's and I want to read you his bio because, I mean, it's outstanding and I can't remember it all. So it is a contributor to industry publications, including the Journal of Accountancy, the Harvard Business Review, and HR.com, and has spoken at many conferences, worldwide project management, pricing, and knowledge workers. He's also active in the information technology alliance and was named on Accountancy Today's list of top 100 most influential people in accounting in 2005. And he's not at the bottom 100 we should. So enjoy it. It's very entertaining. And not it's entertaining, but it's great stuff.
In northern France, at the turn of the 19th century, near the town of Lyon, there was a factory opened up where they first did automated weaving, right? And the local people there that had done the weaving by hand, or I guess by the foot pedal before the shuttle going back and forth, they weren't too happy about this, right? So this automated factory opening up in their town. So what they did, usually we think of the Dutch as having wooden shoes, but in northern France, it's the same kind of deal. They made their shoes out of wood. And the shoes, wooden shoes in France are called sabots, S-A-B-O-T, sabots. And what these folks did is they got angry as they went into the factory and they took off their shoes and they destroyed the equipment and threw the gears and made it all, gunged up, and they became known as the saboteurs, where you get the word sabotage from, right? So they were the saboteurs. And I'm happy to say that it worked, and they still do all the weaving by hand in northern France today. No, they don't. No, they don't. That didn't happen, right? What happened? They rebuilt the factory. Right? Probably better than the first time they fixed the problems that they had the first time through. And the people still didn't have the work to do the weaving automatically. The factory was there. Nothing can't stop the progress. Well, one of the things that I hear from accountants and other professionals is, we're being taken over by the bots. Have you heard this? The bots are coming, AI, we're going to be... All right, let's just clear something up here. If your job can be completely taken over by a bot, your job pretty much sucks. Right? I mean, that's kind of boring. Right? Think about what bots do, right? They basically cut and paste and move data from one spot to the other. Well, who wants to do that? Right? There's other stuff I'd rather be doing. Right? There's more important work, more cerebral, more knowledge work, which is what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Right? So I wanted to share, open with that story to say that this is not new, right? This notion that the change is coming and we're going to be in trouble because the bots or the factories or whoever is taking over. One of the things we have incredible adaptability as a species is to figure out ways to serve one another. Now that sounds kind of weird, but it's true. Human beings are especially adept at figuring out ways to serve one another. So I really have no worry, no concern that all of this bot technology is going to cause job loss across the globe and there's going to be a problem. Right? Because we'll figure new things out. After all, think of it like 20 years ago, did anybody know what a webmaster was? Right? Well, writing a blog couldn't possibly figure out what that was. We didn't even know where it was going to be. The same thing is today. We can't see what it's going to evolve to. Right? So this is my particulars up here. Happy to connect with you on Twitter, LinkedIn. I hear I'm tweetable, so if you're a Twitter type person, please just make sure you get the @Plus. If you want to find me anywhere, just I'm the only @Plus in the world. I guess I'm that vain, I have checked it. I'm the only one, so it's okay. It's all good. I want to talk to you about this practice, accounting practice of the future. And in order to do that, I think the first place to start is to talk about what a business model is. What is a business model? I like to do this at these big high-function conferences that we go to, and I usually try to, if I'm stuck with one of these MBA people that have these advanced degrees in business, and I really don't want to engage with them so much, I ask them the following question after I order a cocktail, and that is to say, what's your definition of a business model? And they go on for about 20 minutes. Right? And I can usually enjoy my cocktail or wine while they're blathering on about what a business model is, right? Because they have all these big, balanced scorecard, blah, blah. Well, I'm not that sophisticated. I'm going to just narrow it down to just this one sentence. The business model is, how does your firm, your organization, whatever you want to think about it, how do you create value for and capture a percentage of that value from your customers? That's a business model. How do you create value for and then capture some percentage of that value that you've created through your pricing? That's all it is, right? And I think it's important to think about it from this perspective. Oftentimes we hear that it's technology that is driving everything, right? We hear there's new technologies coming out, the cloud, and all this great stuff. But I don't think it's necessarily technology that's driving all this. In fact, this guy doesn't think so either. Right? His name is Andy Grove. I recognize him. He was the founder and CEO for the longest time of Intel. And one of the things that he said in his book is disruptive threats come not inherently from new technology, but from new business models. Right? New business models are actually the threat. That's what changes. To give you an example of this, I have to, this is an international speaker's rule, I have to use Apple as the example. I don't know if you're aware of that, but you must use Apple as an example in every speech. But I'm going to use Apple. Apple is an example of, because they've actually changed several businesses the model. But the one I want to talk about is the business model change that they did in 2001. Okay? They came out with this thing called the iPod. In 2001, October of 2001, right? At the time, there were about 30 other MP3 players on the market. Most of them were developed by people who came up with consumer electronics before. Apple had not. It was their first foray into consumer electronics, right? And after they released this thing, the iPod, again, October 2001, they decided that they were going to price it at 2.5 times the price of the nearest competitor. Right? Put that into your Harvard Business Review case study and see what comes out. Right? Probably not a success. Right? That's not 2.5 times the price. There's a fractured market, 30 other players in this, and you've never entered this market before. What are you, crazy? Right? And so it wasn't a new technology. But what did Apple have that the others didn't? Well, they also had this thing called iTunes. And in the States, we have through the late 90s, there was a website called Napster. Maybe you heard of it down here, but Napster was effectively music sharing. Like you could put all of your MP3 files up on a server and share them with anybody else in the world who had a Napster account, right? So guess what? The music industry didn't like this, right? They were very much, so they decided in their infinite wisdom that they would start suing people because they saw this as a crime wave. Right? There were millions of people who wanted billions of these products for free, so they thought. So they started suing 17-year-old kids, who had a server in their mom's basement, they're literally coming after these folks, right? Well, if you have millions of people wanting billions of your product, you don't have a crime wave, which is what they thought they had. You have a business model problem. Right? You got a business model problem. And the business model at the time was, listen, here's what you have to do. If you want this one song from this new band that you like, you've got to buy the whole CD. Right? And you got the one song that you wanted and 14 crappy ones that you were never going to listen to. Right? But they made you buy the whole CD. Right? And this was the problem. What Apple said in iTunes is, no, you know what we'll do? We'll sell you the one song you want for $1. That's it. We'll sell you the one song you want for, and what did most of us say? Oh, I can do that. That's not a problem, right? So it wasn't so much that we wanted the free music, is that we just didn't want to have to pay for the CD when we only wanted one song, right? So what Apple changed was the business model, right? How did they create value for and capture value from its customers? They captured value $1 at a time. And that's a change to a business model, right? The technology was all there. So it wasn't so much the technological shift, but the business model shift that made it work. That make sense? Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit more about business models. And I was in London about a month ago, and I went to the Charles Dickens Museum, where he wrote A Tale of Two Cities. And I started rereading it because I had read it back in high school. But this slide used to say two business models, but I had Tale of Two Cities on my head. So I changed it to A Tale of Two Theories, right? A Tale of Two Theories. There's two theories that are currently in practice right now. We're going to talk about the first one, which is the one that most organizations use. And we're going to call this is the old business model, the old practice equation, or the professional service firm. You'll see that abbreviation sometimes, PSF, right? Professional service firm. And this is the model that most professional service firms use. If I could plug in an equation, it would look something like this. We got our revenue here. And our revenue is made up of three things, three components. And this is what we would do. We have our people capacity, right? How many people do we have? Because what we do is we bill by the hour, and we bill by the people hours, right? We add to that our efficiency, right? And more on this later, but there's a cult of efficiency in business today. It's all about, we gotta get more efficient, right? And then we also do cost plus pricing, right? So we think this is the billable hour, the timesheet. This is the way that we pull this lever, that's the billing rate, right? Whatever that is, that's cost plus pricing. So we're figuring that out. And these are the levers that we can pull. Now, there's an inherent contradiction in this model, right? There's something, or if you look at it carefully, you'll see that one doesn't make sense, and that is this notion of efficiency, right? Think about what happens when you get more efficient at something. You do it faster, right? What does that do to your revenue? Lowers it, right? Right? But you're like, oh no, but I'll increase my rate. It's okay, I'll increase my, but are you going to increase your rate enough to keep up with the efficiency gains that happen through technology? No, you're not, right? Because I don't know if you remember this, way back in the day, there used to be this thing called installing software, and you used to sit there with the stupid diskettes, right? And so those of us who did installs, you actually got, you charged them, 5 or 10 hours to do the install. Right? You're like, okay, great, and all you're doing is loading floppy disks and watching this thing crunch away and all that stuff. Okay, well, guess what? In the cloud, there ain't no install. Right? It's gone. There's just deploy. So we went from 5 or 10 hours to build on that to 0. Now, was that any less valuable to the customer? Not necessarily. It didn't make a difference, right? But we can't charge for it. As a result, with this model, with the professional service firm model, you have zero incentive to become more efficient, although you want to, right? Now, let's talk about the shift in business model that I want to see happen, and that is this change to what I'll call a professional knowledge firm. Not a professional service firm, but a professional knowledge firm, all right? Before I talk about that, let me just explain to you the shift, the way this is going. So, let's do 100,000 years of human history in about 3 minutes, okay? So, originally we were a hunter-gatherer species, right? Here somewhere in Africa, we were hunter-gatherers, and now you want to talk about a large carbon footprint, by the way, right? Hunter-gatherer takes a lot of land to be able to sustain a very small number of people. Right? So big carbon footprint. Then, now somewhere around about 30,000 years ago, we think, we had the first farmers. I think the first farmers were the first entrepreneurs, the first risk takers. Because picture the conversation, we're hanging there in the cave or wherever, and one guy says, instead of just running all over the place trying to gather all this stuff, I think we're just going to stay here and replant the seeds in front of the cave in the spring. And the other guy's like, dude, that is crazy talk. We are so not doing that, right? Because with that, no, we're going to keep going. So this was the shift that happened. And then we became a more of an agricultural-based society. And throughout the world, we had agriculture. Well, around 1700, there was another shift. And I talked about it earlier, the sabots. And we began thinking about factories, and we got organized around industry. So instead of the farm being the central basis for the way things were in agriculture, it became more loaded around the factory. And how did the factory work? It's interesting that there are institutions that came about during this factory model that tend to look like factories even though they make no sense, right? One good example is school, right? School came about as part of the factory model. And if you think about it, a school is like a slow-moving factory, right? You send the kids down, they go, they get more knowledge on the way down. They go down the hall, back the hall, and then they maybe go to high school or college and they get the finishing plant, right, is in another place. So it's actually slow-moving factory. But this really makes no sense, right? But that's when it started. It started out with this factory model in mind. Now, around the 1920s or so, it depends on where you want to exactly put the date, we started to see a shift to this service-based model, right? This is where hotel chains started to come about. There was always inns and hotels and all that stuff, but we first started to organize it more on a mass scale. We also started to see like airlines, package delivery companies. So these were all services that provided services for people. So there was a revolution around service. McDonald's, for example, which I know you have here, and Kentucky Fried Chicken are examples of service companies. You don't go there for the great food, right? You go there for the fast service. You want to get in and out of there because you got something else to do, right? So they are more service-based companies. Well, in 1957, Peter Drucker coins the term knowledge worker, right? Peter Drucker is the one who coins this term, knowledge worker. And what happens then, and we're still trying to get our mind around this concept, because the shift away from service to knowledge is an interesting one. Because in all three previous iterations around the farm, around the factory, and around the service, the business owner, the farm owner, the capitalist, however you want to think about it, they owned, as Karl Marx would say, the means of production, right? Because the means of production was the farm or the factory or the service business, right? And you had to go to wherever that was in order to create the service. Airlines, another example of a service business. You got to go to the airport if you work for an airline, right? You got to go there. Well, the key difference between a service worker and a knowledge worker is understanding that that's not the case anymore. And the way I like to describe it is this. In the previous world, in the service world, you had to you could bring your coffee to the office, right? You could stop and get coffee and bring it to the office, right? If you're a knowledge worker, you can bring your office to the coffee, right? You can bring your office to the coffee. You can go sit in a cafe somewhere that has internet access and do your job just as effectively as if you were sitting in somebody else's office, right? Because the means of production now is not any factory, is not any building, but it's the gray matter between your ears, right? And you maintain it. You take it with you. You own your own means of production. And nobody can take that from you. We haven't, developed a USB port that sucks the information out of your head before you leave, right? This is it's called tacit knowledge, right? The people who leave organizations, they still maintain all of the knowledge with them. And as a result, a lot of crazy things happen, especially if you're still building by the hour, which is the old model. We have people who say things like, I can't send my people and have them trained. What if we train them and they leave? Have you ever heard this conversation? Like, what if we train these people and they leave? Then what are we going to do, right? All right, well, think about it, though. That makes absolutely no sense. The real question is, what if you don't train them and they stay? We have the dumbest people in the industry. We keep them stupid because they might leave. What? Right? It absolutely makes no sense. So what we have to do is constantly be building our knowledge. Now, in the new business model, there are 4 shifts. I'm going to take you through them one at a time. But is a shift away from this focus on revenue and a focus on profit. And I have a very broad definition of profit that I want to explain to you in just a few minutes. Much, much larger than what most people think. Then there's a shift from capacity, right? This is the number of people that we have, to this intellectual capital. It's a fancy word for knowledge, right? So what is it that we know? So we're shifting away from worrying about how many people we have And 2, what do our people know? Right? It's more important for us to track what do people know. Then there's a shift away from efficiency toward effectiveness. Now, the best way to explain the difference between efficiency and effectiveness is just think of it this way. If you have a brain tumor, do you want an efficient surgeon or an effective one? Effective, right? Get this thing out of my head so that I can survive. Right? You want that, so you don't care about their efficiency. Well, I maintain to you that most of your customers, they don't care about your efficiency either. They want you to be effective, don't they? They want you to achieve some kind of result, right? But if you bill them by the hour, what are you telling them to look at? Your efficiency, not your effectiveness. And as a result of this, and this is a very real problem, we have 30-year veterans of whatever industry they're in, like really smart people, doing bank reconciliations, right? Why? Because they can do them faster than some new person. And the customers know this, and they're like, no, I don't want your new guy to do this because it's going to take him forever and you're billing me by the hour. I want you to do it because I know it's going to only take you an hour or 15 minutes or whatever, right? So, and then as a result, well, I guess that's what we have to do. So, and then all of a sudden, all of the more seasoned people, us with gray hair, we're still doing work that we did when we were first out of school, right? My friend Ron Baker, who I do the radio show with, has a great saying for this. He says, what we have in the accounting profession is a lot of brain surgeons who pierce ears, right? And I think that's a very real problem. Right? We can't have brain surgeons piercing ears. It makes no sense. Picture if you tried to build a business model around brain surgeons who also pierced ears. Right? You couldn't work. It wouldn't work. So that's why we have to think about changing this business model. Now, the problem is that I mentioned this, there's this cult of efficiency out there, and there is. It's throughout the world. It is a cult of efficiency. We call them Lean Six Sigma Guru Ninja Turtle Black Belt people, right? I mean, they're all like, efficiency! We gotta get more efficient! Everything's gotta be more efficient, right? And look, I have no problem with efficiency. I think efficiency is great. What I have a problem with is thinking that it's somehow beneficial to customers, right? It's not, right? Well, and by the way, for most of us as professionals, efficiency happens naturally. It's called the learning curve. Right? The first time we do something, it takes us longer. After about the 10th time we get it, or if we don't, by then we're gone. Right? If as a professional, if you didn't get it after the 10th time, you're not around very long. Right? So it's going to happen, or you're going to be gone. So efficiency is this very weird thing, right? It doesn't matter to the customer, except it does because we tell them to care, right? But they want us to be effective. We'll talk more about this notion of what is it we can do to be effective. And then the last one, the fourth column, the fourth shift that I want you to make, is a shift away from cost-led pricing to what's called value-led pricing. And we're going to spend the bulk of the second half of our presentation talking mostly about how do we do that, because that's perhaps one of the larger challenges. But I do want to expose to you that it's not just this value-led pricing thing that stands on its own. Right? It's these other things that are also involved. We're also involved in shifts from looking about revenue to profit. We're looking about capacity to the intellectual capital and effectiveness to efficiency. So far with me? All right. Is this working for you? All right, good. All right, let's talk. I have 4 assertions that I want to make about this. And I don't have any data to substantiate these. These are just my 4 assertions. Fine, just stay with me. You can disagree with these, that's fine. All right? But I'm not a big data person anyway. I'm not like data to me is kind of weird. I have a love-hate relationship with data. By the way, most data sucks. You know that's not like a lot of the data that's out there is not. So I'm not quite sure about the whole big data thing. I'm really not, because it's really big bad data, right? So I'm a little bit concerned about this notion. Maybe it'll get cleaned up the more that we can do this, but it's a problem. I also find that data inside an organization is a little bit like a substance abuse problem, right? Like you have leaders and managers who they get a little bit of data, and then they want more, right? They need more data, and they won't make a decision unless we have like this plethora of data behind it. I'm like, do you not realize that conclusive data is only available about the past? Yeah. Right? Conclusive data in business is only available what happened yesterday. After all, we call it accounting. Right? We accounted for it. It happened. There's nothing we can do about it. It's done. My friend Ron Baker also has this great phrase. He says, accountants, especially auditors, like to come in and bayonet the wounded after a war. That's what they It's like, great, thanks. All right. So here are my 4 assertions. I said, 1, growth without profits is perilous. Growth without profits is perilous. And I'll make this claim. I'm not the greatest business mind that there is, but I could come into any of your organizations, or quite frankly, I think any organization in the world, and double the revenue of the organization in 12 to 18 months. Double the revenue. Doubling revenue is not a problem. I will put you out of business doing it, by the way. You will not be able to sustain what is created from that doubling of the revenue, so not only will double revenue, but you'll be out of business. Right? Because if I don't do it profitably, if I'm not worried about, I'm not concerned with doing it profitably, I don't care, I'm just doubling revenue, right? Peter Drucker, the great management guru, has a great way to describe profit. He said, profit is the price we pay for tomorrow. Profit is the price we pay for tomorrow. In other words, if we want to have a sustainable business, we must have profit, because that's the indication that we're doing something right. If you have a business and it's not profitable, you should go out of business. It means you're screwing it up, right? It means there's something wrong. I can give it to somebody else, but then I don't have the tie. Same thing with an orange. An orange is a tangible asset, right? It means if I have the orange, you don't have the orange. I could split the orange in half, then we each have half an orange, but it's tangible in and of itself. But then there's non-rival assets. And non-rival assets are different. It's like the alphabet, the 26 letters of the English alphabet. We can all use, and it doesn't decrease the value of the alphabet to somebody else, right? In fact, it increases. The more common the language is, the more likely we are to gain benefits and understanding, right? So it's a non-rival asset. And so therefore, non-rival assets are more leverageable, meaning we can create more value from non-rival assets than we can from rival assets. Does that make sense? All right. What's a billable hour? Rival or non-rival? Rival, right? I can only bill one customer for that hour, legally. Otherwise, it's fraud, right? But it's a rival asset. So if you're building a business, do you want to build a business around a rival asset or a non-rival asset? Your knowledge is non-rival. If I have an idea, if I have knowledge and I share it with somebody, I still have the knowledge, don't I? Right? In fact, now they have the knowledge. In fact, then if I share it with another person, they can even communicate, maybe create new knowledge. Right? So it's really interesting. So I want to build my business around a non-rival asset. Well, if you're billing by the hour, you're building your business around a rival asset. And that's a problem, right? All right, quick check here. I like to do this every so often just to make sure where we are. How many of you have ever, in your lifetimes, filled out a timesheet? Hands up. Hands up, hands up. Keep them up, keep them up. You ever filled out a timesheet? Okay, good. Keep them up. Don't put them down yet. Simon says, keep your hands up. All right. How many of you have ever, in your lives, not exactly put exactly what happened on your timesheet? Like sometimes too many hours, sometimes too few hours. Okay, just let's make a note. We have to do an ethics class next. All right. Now, and in all fairness, it's down too, right? Sometimes you're like, well, yeah, I spent 8 hours on that, but if I put down 8, my boss is going to think I'm an idiot, right? Or it's not fair that that customer should have to pay, blah, 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 for that. So instead of 8, I put 6. Well, what I find so interesting about this is that so many people tell me that, because not only do I want you to eliminate the billable hour in terms of pricing, which we'll talk about later, I want you to get rid of your timesheets completely. I want you to get rid of them. Well, and here's why. People are like, well, I need to track my actual costs. Really? Really? It's tracking actual costs, really? Right? Well, and I did have somebody argue with me, not here, but in a previous iteration of this class. Somebody said to me, it's okay, Ed, no, it's okay, because the lies cancel each other out. That's your theory. Your theory is the lies cancel each other out, so it's okay. All right? And then you're like, no, I need my hours because I need to know who my good people are. Oh, horse hockey, you know who they are. You don't need your timesheet to know who the good people and the bad people are. Right? You just use the billable hours as a justification. And oh, by the way, you can do it either way. This is how screwed they are. You're like, okay, you're billing way too many hours. You're an idiot, get out of here. Or, you're not billing enough hours. We really can't keep you around very long. Right? So unless you bill the precise number of hours that somebody wants, so we can get rid of you for too many hours or too few hours. Right? Because not all hours are the same. When you're over budget, the hours are bad. And then who usually gets those hours? The smart people, because they're in there fixing it. Right? So there's this really weird thing going on. And then there's, I also need it for project management because I need to know how long it's going to take me the next time to do that. Again, people are lying on their time. Everybody puts on their timesheet what they think should have happened. Fair? Right? We put on the timesheet what we say it's optimal. It's not actual cost, it's optimal cost is what it is. Right? Well, I can do optimal cost without a timesheet too. Right? Anyway, we're going to get rid of that. All right. And then the effectiveness is always and everywhere more important than efficiency. Right? Effectiveness is more important than efficiency. We certainly want to have this. Things can be described as effective, right? And then there's things that you can't measure efficiency on. And I think work is one of them. Knowledge work is one. You can't describe it efficiently. I mean, it would be sort of like describing your marriage as, we have a very efficient marriage. I think I'd get slapped if I said that. Honey, our marriage is very efficient. What does that even mean? Right? Actually, American philosopher Pittman McGee says that the opposite of love is not hate, it's efficiency. Right? But we want to be effective. How can you be effective? How can you be more effective for your customers? And then lastly, value pricing is superior to cost plus pricing for capturing value in a professional knowledge firm. All right, we'll talk more about that later. All right, good? Still good? All right. So I'm going to go very quickly through these movements from revenue to profit. Right? And the four pillars, the four assertions. The first one I want to deal with is this notion of the myth of market share, right? The myth of market share. Great book by Richard Miniter. If you haven't read this, put it on your reading list. The myth of market share. Why market share is the fool's gold of business. Because there's a tremendous number of business people who believe this one. This notion that market share is the key to everything. Right? I don't know if you remember, there was a CEO guy of Microsoft, kind of heavy-set, bald guy. You ever see him? Steve Ballmer, I'm talking about. Right? I've actually seen him on stage at Microsoft conferences, storming up and down the stage, screaming, "Market share! Market share! We all need market share!" You know, it didn't work out very well for him. He's gone, right? Because he was so obsessed with this notion of market share, right? The market share doesn't work the way we think it does. If you are profitable, you can gain market share if you so choose. But market share in and of itself does not create profit. Right? Now, there are examples, but it's almost like, wet streets don't cause rain. Right? It's inverse thinking. That's the problem. It's cause that we've mixed up cause and effect. Sustainable profitability can allow you to grow market share if you want. Great example of a company that doesn't do this is BMW. BMW has only had 2% of the worldwide market share in automobiles for almost a century. But here's the thing, they don't want any more. They want to be the ultimate driving machine. Right? That's what they want to be. And they only want to serve that market. Now, they've also been profitable almost that entire time as well. Right? So it has nothing to do with their market share, which is only at 2%. Right? So I think we sometimes look at this wrong. Well, in our businesses, the way we don't talk necessarily about capturing huge portions of market share because you're small businesses, I get that. But there's a part of the myth that remains, and that is this: we got to grow. We have to increase revenue. Right? We have to constantly be increasing. Revenue's got to go up, got to go up. Right? And I'll say, well, okay, that's great, but only if you're doing it profitably, right? So that's why the shift has to be away from this notion of revenue to profit, right? Now, I said I have a very broad definition of profit. Let me share this with you. This might be, in my opinion, one of the most important things I talk about. In any transaction, there are two parties, right? But there are three variables. And this is something that we often miss. So there are two parties to a transaction, but there are three variables. There's the cost for the person who's ever doing the provision of it. There's the price, which is the negotiated thing that sits in between. And then there's the value that the customer gets from whatever it is that they're purchasing, right? Now, we definitely measure the one side of profit, right? We measure the difference between all the subtotal of all of our prices and the subtotal of all of our costs, and then we have this thing called income, and that's profit, right? So we measure that side of it. But what we don't see is that the customer also has a profit, because they wouldn't buy something unless it was more valuable to them than the money. Now, I tested this here in South Africa, and it still works, because when I speak throughout the world, this very thing happens. Not always, but very, very often. I go to the airport and buy a cup of coffee. I say thank you to the barista, and the barista, in reply, says, thank you. Have you noticed this thing? It's called the double thank you moment, right? When you make a transaction and you say thank you and they say thank you back, right? That's an odd construct linguistically in English, because in most cases when somebody says thank you to you, they usually say you're welcome. Actually, I don't know about here, but in the States, we don't say you're welcome anymore. We say no problem. I'm telling you, the last 5 years, that's been a transition. I don't know why, but we don't say you're welcome anymore. We say no problem. Right? That's now the proper response to thank you, except in a transaction, in which case then the proper response to thank you for the coffee is thank you, Mr. or Ms. Customer, right? And it's because this double thank you moment is happening that we can see that value is created on both sides of this transaction, or I should say profit is created on both sides of the transaction, right? Profit is certainly created to the coffee shop. They're making a profit. But I'm also profiting too, because I want that cup of coffee more than I wanted my money, right? I don't know how much more. I can't necessarily measure it. I can't go into my head and figure, how many heat-on conversion to rand, right? What's the pleasure in my head versus the money? But it's more, right? And what's amazing to me is that it's on these two sides of the transaction where the wealth of the world is created. This is where wealth comes from, folks. Not just the one side, but the both sides of this transaction. Right? In fact, I'm really not sure why we study poverty. You hear about these poverty studies? I figured out a long time ago what causes poverty. Birth. Birth causes poverty. Right? Every single one of us in this room was born dirt poor, completely naked, and with nothing. And if it weren't for the benevolence of our parents, life would be nasty, brutish, and short. Right? So there's fine. We know where that's poverty. The more interesting question is, where does wealth come from? How can we create more wealth? And wealth is not zero sum. Wealth is not zero sum. There's a famous movie, Wall Street. We have Gordon Gekko and Charlie Sheen. I can't remember Charlie Sheen's character name. I think it's Bud, but for whatever reason, in my mind, it's Gordon Gekko and Charlie Sheen. Even though that's not, but that's how it works. And there's a famous scene there, there's the greed is good speech, and I'm not going to talk about that. There's a scene that happens in Gekko's office where Charlie Sheen says to him, how much is enough, Gordon? How many yachts can you water ski behind? He says, it's not a question of enough, pal. It's a zero-sum game. Wealth isn't created or destroyed, merely transferred from one perception to the other. It's like magic. Right? And it's this notion of this zero-sum game that becomes the problem. And most business people fall into thinking that it's zero-sum. And I hate to say this, but accountants are partially to blame for this. Why? Debits equal credits. It seems like it works out. It seems like the numbers are all the same. Right? It all nets to zero. Right? A sale on one side is a cost on another. But that's not the case at all. Right? That's actually not the case. Business is not zero sum. If it were, we'd just have the same amount of wealth, and that's it. And it would just stay there, be static, right? But we as a species have come up with this. I mean, look around. All of this is pretty amazing. What's just in this room, you can't even possibly fathom it, right? All of the stuff that the experiments that had to go on in order to create everything that's in this room. Just absolutely incredible, right? And it happened one transaction at a time, right? Where wealth was created on both sides, right? So we're not in business, we're not trading like for like, value for value. It's an unequal trade all of the time, right? This is also, by the way, salaries. Price is your salary, right? You have costs, maybe your mortgage, maybe what you do at home, you send kids to school, whatever, you have costs, right? And then your salary is your price. And the value that you provide your employer should be higher than your salary. It's not exploitation, all right? You're supposed to provide your employer with more value than they pay you. Otherwise, they would pay someone else. Right? So it's not exploitation. That's the way this is supposed to work. Right? All of these transactions that are happening. All right. Lastly on this, because I want to pound this to death. Do you care about the cost structure of people that you buy from? No. Like, you don't walk into a coffee shop and think, I hope they have their cost structure figured correctly here. Right? Hope they've got this costing thing down, right? When you go walk in to buy something, you don't care about that, right? So here's just a quick little tip for you. Please, I beg you, never, never, never have a cost conversation with your customers. It usually sounds like this. But it took me 5 hours to do that. And the customer's like, I don't care. Not my problem. I don't care about your costs. Got news for you. Right? Your costs are not my problem. They're your problem. Okay? So stop arguing costs with your customers. It's insane. Right? So, all right, so customers don't care about your costs. Do customers want prices to be higher or lower? Lower. Is that like, can we just accept that as a universal truth? Right? Customers always would prefer prices to be lower. Can we stop worrying about it and thinking, oh, this customer wants a lower price, and say it like it's surprising? To me, it's like saying that we blame airline crashes on gravity. What caused the airline crash? It was gravity. Gravity caused the crash, which is true, but completely irrelevant, right? So the same thing is true with customers are always going to want prices to be higher. Now, as a professional, do you want to maximize the value you provide to your customers or minimize it? Maximize it, right? You want to maximize the value that you provide. Your customers, what do they want from you? Do they want to maximize value from you, or do they want to minimize value from you? Maximize. So it's the one element of these three that you're all on the same side. The conversation that we always think of as sales is not about sales. It's about how do we maximize the value here? See, professionals have a huge and distinct advantage over every other type of organization. And that is, you get to have an individual one-on-one conversation with everyone you're about to serve. You have the opportunity to ask them questions about what the value is to them, right? And how you can together maximize the value you provide. You have that opportunity. And for the longest time, most professionals have just thrown it away. Most of the time, their conversations as professionals are all about, well, I need to really figure out how much this is going to cost me to serve this guy. So the conversations are more about you, trying to figure out what you need to know, and less about them and what they need. No, I really have loved my customers. Yeah, I know. But sadly, when push comes to shove, that's what the conversation usually ends up being about. Not this afternoon, the second half today, I hope to show you a way to change that conversation, right? So that you can have a conversation about value and feel really good about it and comfortable about having it, right? I'm going to skip this. I want to talk about this from capacity to capital quickly. So I said what the shift here is from worrying about our people capacity, the number of people we have, and moving over instead of saying, all right, what is our intellectual capital? There are 4 forms of capital that exist in the world, 4 of them. You're pretty familiar with the first one, right? Financial capital? You're accountants. I would think you would be. All right, so you get that one. That's the one that you guys are most familiar with. But then there's 3 other forms. There's what's called the intellectual capital, which is the knowledge, right? Intellectual capital is the knowledge. Then there's the structural capital. The structural capital can be described this way. If you have an office, right, and there's nobody in the office, that's the structural capital. The stuff that's still in the office after everybody leaves. So the computer systems, the phone systems, the process, the lights, your customers' list, the list, right? The data, that's all structural capital, right? And that has some kind of value too. But the 4th form of capital is this thing called social capital. Social capital. My grandmother put it to me this way. She said, Ed, it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? That's social capital. But social capital is really interesting because it works sort of like this, all right? So who's social capital for you? Your customers are clearly social capital. You know customers, right? So you know who they are. But you also have other examples of social capital. Sage is part of your social capital network. Your relationship with Sage, your relationship with providers to you. So any other vendors that you have, those people are part of your social capital. I would think that this room is an example of social capital. Some of you are going to have conversations with one another, or perhaps you have this morning waiting for breakfast. I didn't realize you're like not real far from me. Let's go to lunch, right? This is an example of building and growing social capital, right? So that your knowledge of other people in your industry and what they do, right? You sharing customers, like you ever link 2 customers together? You say, oh no, you got to talk to this person, right? That's a great example of social capital creation, right? That you're making this connection point. Well, you know what social media is? It's just the newest form of social capital. That's all it is. It's just the newest form of social capital. How do you expand your social capital network? And it works great. I've had conversations with authors of books that I've read on Twitter. I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy is actually replying to me. You know, because you know what? Authors like to have their ego stroked too. Like, I really liked your chapter on, you know, they're like, oh, really good, you know. Go back and forth on it. And did you mean this about this? Oh, yes, that's a good example of that, right? So you're expanding this social capital, right? Now, what's interesting about this is the World Bank comes out with a report every 10 years or so. The first one was 1998, it was one in 2008, and there's one due out this year in 2018. And it's their report on the wealth of nations. And one of the things that their trend line analysis is showing is that the wealth of the world, the overwhelming majority of the wealth, is not financial capital. In fact, they estimate that the financial capital is only about 20% of the wealth of the world. 20%. In other words, we could have an absolute catastrophic financial meltdown across the world with all currencies going to 0 value. And we would still maintain 80% of the world's wealth. Like, how is this possible? Well, because this hotel is not going to forget how to serve people. You're not going to forget how to do accounting, your knowledge, right? You're not going to forget. That's still all going to exist after this day of catastrophic financial failure, which is extraordinarily unlikely to happen, by the way. But even if it did, my point is we would still know. Right? McDonald's will still know how to serve hamburgers. They're not going to forget. Far more catastrophic would be some kind of a brain disease that humans get that give us all amnesia. Right? Picture waking up. Now, what would the value of Coca-Cola be the day after we all got collective amnesia? The brand. Nothing. Because you wouldn't recognize it. Like, I don't know what that, no idea what that is. Right? So the brand would go from this, built probably close to $1 trillion asset to nothing, right? So that's really, so most of the wealth of the world is in these other three forms of capital: intellectual, structural, and social. And that's absolutely amazing, right? And how can we continue to build on those things? All right. So when we're adapting the capacity, remember I was talking about like the shift from capacity, from worrying about people capacity. What I want you to do is think of your capacity not so much as your people, but as where your customers are. This is a schematic of a 777, right? And you can kind of see the plane there. I want you to begin to think of your firm, your organization, whether you're a sole proprietor, that's fine, or whether you've got lots of people working with you. I want you to think of your company, your firm, as not an airline, but one airplane. You have one airplane. And like when you get the plane gets delivered to whatever airlines, from Airbus or Boeing, right? The airline decides a very important thing, and that is where to put the bulkheads, right? Where do they create the sections on the plane, right? And notice what they don't do is they don't fill all of the seats on this big plane with, jam as many in, because unfortunately this is what a lot of accountants would do, right? They would fill all of the seats with, we gotta get as many people in as we possibly can, right? Get them all on the plane, right? No, they don't do that. And when they start selling tickets, they only sell a certain percentage of them at a lower fare beforehand. Right? Then they stop doing that and they reserve capacity. That's why this is called adaptive capacity. They reserve capacity for the full fare coach. The people who are traveling on business per se. Like, you got to fly somewhere this week. And they do capture in their pricing how? By charging you more the closer you buy to the day that you fly. Right? They charge you more. Now, what's interesting about this model, I want you to think about this, because I hear this from a lot of accounts. Well, if you mean I can charge two different customers, I can charge two different prices for, quote, the same thing? Yeah, you can. Absolutely. But it takes me the same number of hours to do it. No, doesn't matter. You can charge one more and the other less. That's perfectly acceptable. Really, what if they talk to one another? We sit on a plane next to people. Very few of us paid even close to the same rate, right? We don't walk down the aisle going, "What'd you pay? What'd 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 you pay?" And then we storm the counter. This guy only paid, whatever. I want a refund. In fact, the exact opposite is true, isn't it? If you happen to have a conversation with your seatmate and they say, "I got this great deal on this flight at whatever," who are you mad at? Yourself. You're like, so stupid, I should have booked ahead of time. Right? So you're not actually angry at the airline, you're angry at yourself. And they're able to do that because this is how they shift the capacity around. Now, a guy by the name of Dan Morris, who created this model, in fact, the Vera Sage Institute is listed. It has nothing to do with Sage except the last 4 letters. But he is an accountant out of San Jose, California, and Portland. He lives in Portland, but his practice is mostly in San Jose, and he does a lot of commuting back and actually flies all over the world. Dan is an international taxation genius. Okay, but one of the things that Dan does is he has this laminated, and it's on his desk. And when a prospective customer comes and sits down, he slides it across the table, and one of the questions that he asks during the interview with the prospective customer is, "Where do you think you want to sit on my airplane?" Do you want to sit up front, right, where we've got great seats, lots of leg room, going to serve you champagne, right, before everybody takes off? You want to be here in the middle? This is pretty good. Or do you want to be in the back of the plane with the old lady who keeps hitting the call button 47 times because she wants more peanuts, even though we haven't served peanuts on planes in 2 decades? And the smelly bathrooms, right? Notice, though, that everybody on this plane gets what? The same basic service. Yes? In my case, I flew from, Dallas to London and then London to Johannesburg, right? And I didn't get there significantly later than the people who were sitting up front. Yes, they got off the plane first, right? But I didn't get there later than they did, and the people behind me didn't get there significantly later, right? And the key is here, we all got there safely. That's what we wanted, right? Whenever people ask me how my flight is, my usual response is uneventful, the way I like them. I don't like how was flight? Uneventful. Nothing crazy happened. That's good, right? So this is this thing. I want you to think about your firm as this, and you want a certain number of people to go as they come in. Well, think about what airlines do. Not only do they do this, but they parade us through what first class looks like, right? And you're kind of walking through, going, "Oh man, I should have upgraded." Right? So they parade you through because what's different? Not the same basic service. You all get from London to Johannesburg around the same time. What's different? Your experience. Right? They create different experiences for each of the different classes in the airliner. I don't know why this is, but throughout the world, professionals have they're very, we've got to treat all of our customers equally. Right? This is nonsense. You can't treat all customers equally. In fact, I submit to you that it is impossible to give a D or F customer proper people who know how to do the work. Right? Not the people who, quote, need hours, but the people who know how to do the work. And that's one of the important things. Right? Any total quality service, mentoring and coaching is certainly inefficient. Right? Terrible. That's all. Networking, business development, social media. That time suck, right? I get this still in the States. Still, in the United States. And none of my customers are on social media. Why do I need to be on social media? First of all, that's a lie. My 75-year-old mother is on social media. She's on Facebook, all right? She wants to see pictures of her grandchildren. She's going to be on Facebook, all right? So this nonsense that people are not, they're there, but it's Facebook is just for, it's not very professional. Yeah? Like all the way to the bank, it's not professional. Right? One of the most profitable organizations in the world right now is Facebook. So social media is inefficient, but it's very effective. Right? And similarly, by the way, if you have none of your customers on social media, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You'll be the last accountant with no customers on social media. Good for you. Right? Innovation. Think about that. Innovation is completely inefficient. Has to be. By definition. We're coming up with something new that didn't exist before. Right? So innovation is inefficient. But if we're not innovative, we're dying. If we're not coming up with new stuff. I mean, that's part of the problem with accounting, for the most part. When's the last accounting innovation? Can you think of one? I mean, other than double entry bookkeeping by Luca Pacioli in the 1450s? I don't know, I guess the statement of cash flows or something, that's kind of new. Right? But what's the innovation just from the accounting standpoint? I'm not talking about the technology, right? You can get all that faster, but debits still equal credits, right? So it's not terribly innovative. We have to go, triple entry bookkeeping. We're moving over to triple entry bookkeeping. It's one better. We're doing triple entry. Actually, that's coming. That's actually part of blockchain. By the way, I don't know if you're aware of that. But this notion of, if you look up triple entry bookkeeping, it's one of the things that the blockchain is going to be able to solve. This notion that transactions exist, this huge ledger will exist at some point that everybody has access to, but is completely secure from others, right? And there'll be instantaneous, right, transactions that are happening, and will exist probably locally on your computer system, but it will also exist on this ledger outside. So actually, it will be triple entry. Very interesting idea. Okay. And the last thing that is inefficient is what I'm going to talk about later, is this notion of pricing. Pricing on purpose, right? So I want you to be completely inefficient in your pricing. I want you to slow your pricing down. I promise you that the faster you quote a price, the lower it will be. Right? I want you to concern yourself and worry about price. I want you to create inside your organization a pricing committee or pricing cartel. If you're a sole proprietor, this consists of you and your significant other or best friend or dog. I don't care, but you're going to have somebody else who's going to help you with pricing, that you're going to have a conversation with to slow this down. right? And by the way, not everybody in your firm is going to do pricing, especially the managing partners, who usually suck at it, right? Just because you're the smartest person from a technical standpoint doesn't mean you know how to price, right? Who is the highest paid person on the plane that I flew here in? Well, who's the highest paid person on that plane? Pilot, right? Highest paid person on that plane is the pilot. Okay? Did he or she set price? Nope. Nope. Not gonna let them do it. In fact, price is one of the 4 P's of marketing. Pricing is a marketing function. You should have if you have a marketing department, it's your marketing people should set price. You're like, what? Yeah, that's who should set price. Because the function of marketing is, get this, understand the market. I know, it took me a while to figure it out now. Right? They're the ones who should be setting price for you. But I'm the professional, I know. But you suck at pricing. We're not going to let you do that anymore. All right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. Let's do our break now. I have 18 minutes after. I am going to start talking again at 10:35, whether there's anybody in here or not. I talk to myself all the time. I find myself mildly amusing most of the time. All right?